this one.
That was a nice break, and we appreciate being in this lovely setting. So for the second half of our Symposium on Women in the Arts, we have an incredible panel before you. Your program has them listed and a photo so you can match their names with who they are. And if you're online, you'll see their name under them when they first speak, so you can identify them. And what we'd like to do with the second half of the day is build upon those great presentations you heard this morning and think about our theme, pushing forward, reaching back, and explore what that means to women in the arts in various professions. So you'll hear, and they're going to introduce themselves, but you'll see that we have practicing artists, gallerists, of course, museum curators. We have two. We have an additional joining us, as well as a representative from the media, who, if you put all of those pieces together, are really the building blocks of professional women in the arts. And so I have some questions I will ask them. We'll have some great dialogue. We'll give you all a chance to ask questions. And it's just going to be a really interesting conversation. So we'll kick off with broadly pushing forward and thinking about gender and art. We'll take a break. We'll come back and broadly reaching back and thinking about other themes. But you'll see it all sort of woven together is the hope. So I'm going to ask, we'll just start on this end. We'll start with Michele. If you could just briefly introduce yourselves.
Sure. My name is Michele Marceau. I own Principal Gallery in Alexandria, Virginia, and Charleston, South Carolina.
Hi, I'm Brittany Richmond. I'm the assistant curator at the SCAD Museum of Art in Savannah, Georgia.
I'm Amanda Markel, contemporary wildlife sculptor. I use negative space and bronze to tell stories.
I'm Donna Howell-Sickles, longtime AWA member, longtime artist, fairly new gallery owner.
I'm Robin Salmon. You know who I am.
I'm Cheryl Newby, and I hope you were at my old gallery last night. And I am now retired after 38 years in the business, and loving retirement now.
My name's Ann Brown. I'm not Robin. And I could be Robin, but then I'd have to be like totally a new person and not half as talented as her. I spent the last 50-some years in the arts. I just retired a couple of years ago as the associate publisher of Fine Art, Connoisseur, and PleinAir magazines. And my greatest joy right now is being on the board of the National Sculpture Society with Robin.
Bravo. So I'm going to stay over here on the sidelines while I ask the questions so I can see them all, and we'll just go into the discussion. So thinking about the theme of gender and art and women, first let's just start with, did anything jump out at you from the presentations this morning, from Jan or from Robin, that really hit you as a theme related to women in the arts? Did anything stand out for you? Or something you wanted to build upon?
Well, I'll start with something that Robin mentioned, which is birth year. Having come from a publication that we used the birth year of every artist that was illustrated in both magazines. Like, if you don't want to give your birth year, get over it, grow balls, and that's part of life.
Anything? Yes, Robin?
Well, often galleries will let you get away with not giving that birth year, but museums will not. And you know, even if you're deceased, we'll find out what your birth year was.
So do you think it's different for women than men to give their birth year?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Tell me why.
We're vain.
Well, I think women's life cycles are something that the general society has commented on or talks about a lot. It's related to, you know, giving birth, but also, you know, there's mythologies like mother, maiden, crone. I mean, there's so many different forms of what a woman should be, and at what point in their life should they be this kind of woman. And I think when you pair that with the idea of an emerging or an established artist, that things get complicated and weird, and we want to be valued as the person we are, not as like our productivity. So,
Well said.
Very good comment.
Something that struck me with Robin's presentation was mentioning quite a few of the women either not marrying, not having children because it was too difficult to balance those, or helping the man with his career. And I would just love to hear some of your thoughts about those 2 points, either balancing family, is that different as a woman, versus helping the man?
I just, from my experience as a gallery owner, going back 30 years, many of the women artists that I wanted to represent back then were not able to because they had those parental duties. They had the bulk of them, the duties. So I'm just really encouraged because that is totally shifting and changing, and it's changing really rapidly. And so seeing that makes me really happy.
So you have seen that even within your gallery space?
Yes, yes, clear difference coming up in the last, even the last 5 years. It just seems like it's more rapidly changing, where women are getting help with that responsibility. They're able to take full-time jobs as an artist, and sharing the parental responsibilities a little bit more than they used to. So
That's great. Does anybody have an echo to that?
Yes, I agree with her. I've seen when we were starting out all this adventure of AWA, and we had already started our art careers earlier than that. So we were all young women at that time, and you could have taken a poll of the women who were successful in the arts back in the 80s. Successful in Western art, let me be very clear, that's my only field. And you'd find that everybody either had no children or one. There were very few people that had multiple children, and I think it was a decision. I didn't technically make that decision for myself, but that's how it worked out for me, and it would have been a different art career had I had more than one child. And then what I'm seeing to now, and a lot of the young women that I've met in, say, Montana at the C.M. Russell Show and other places, it's a completely different perspective on being an artist as a job, and your families are taking that more seriously. Either they have seen that women can do this, or somehow, because I now meet people who have supportive families and supportive networks and who have 2 and 3 children, and it's simply a shift in attitude of what kind of sacrifice is required to give all your time and your thought to the arts.
Okay, one quick tech break. Can everybody inch their mics towards them a little closer? We're having a hard time picking you all up, and if you can just be conscious of that. Thank you. So the other piece of that, the women being assistants to or supporting the man's career in art, what are our thoughts about hearing some of that?
I have to tell a great story. And I know this person isn't going to mind. Lori Stevens, who is a member of AWA, a number of years ago, I was in her studio, which she then shared with her then husband, Tom Gillian, and she had this painting she was working on of Tom coming through a door of her studio, and she was painting. And at the time, Fine Art Connoisseur, and they still do, have self-portraits of painters in the last page of the issue. And I said, you have to submit this painting because it says everything about women having this person who is much greater in their art life than them. It says everything. And I was so proud that that our editor chose to print that because I thought, yep, and thank God the next year she divorced him. Yeah.
And if you, for those online, the name of the painting was The Artist's Wife. What? Well, do we still see that happening today, is my question. For those of you as artists or in galleries, have you seen women, or museums, if we've seen that you know women who are equally talented but have taken that backseat willingly or for whatever reason to support a man's art in particular? We're just talking about art right now.
What I see in the artists I know who are married is that they're working together. They're critiquing each other's work, and they're not, in a way, they are competing with each other, but they're really not competing. And it's, society has changed so much. Many of the women I talked about in my talk were from that time period where society wouldn't allow you to be a wife and mother and a professional woman. So, the constraints of society forced a lot of them to do the things that they did or did not do. And it has changed, happily.
Well, thank you. I want to take the next theme sort of from the people making the art into some of the things we're seeing in exhibitions or research or projects where we see the intersection of gender and art. And I would just love to hear if you have some interesting examples you've seen in recent years, whether it is an exhibition or research or some sort of project where it really was about gender, and for us women, in art. Is there anything jumping out when you think of that theme? An exhibition or a book or anything where it was really a newer... And if we can't think of them off the top of our head, what does that tell us? Are there not a lot of those? If you think about AWA doing an all-woman exhibition, are there other projects that really jump out where it's been about women making a statement in a museum or a gallery or a publication?
Well, every July, August, even though I no longer have to face that grueling deadline, is the women's issue of Fine Art Connoisseur.
Right.
And so it's coming up. I know the deadline is very soon, so it's past editorial deadline, but you can still advertise. However, I think what's really important is the fact that years ago we established that women's issue because it was necessary. Mostly it was necessary to beat the head of my old boss to say we need women on the cover of the magazine, not as the subject, but as the artist, whether it was in painting or sculpture.
In fact, we're doing a group ad in that issue. I was receiving photos from artists this morning for their contribution. And it's interesting you said it was necessary to kind of gain traction. When did that start? I'm curious.
Oh, goodness. Maybe 2017.
Okay, so recently,
16,
really?
Yeah.
Within 5 or 6 years.
Could have been, I'm very bad with dates. Don't anybody
Right.
write that down and ask somebody
Right.
who knows. I don't remember.
Well, I'm thinking a couple of examples I can think of. I'd love to hear your ideas. We're starting to see some museums. I'm thinking in Michigan, there's a new women's wing at a museum. We're seeing some other museums add curators of women and artists, which is relatively new and a little more focused. So, first of all, why do you think that is? And what do you think of that, of really singling out women in a permanent way in a space or in the type of work?
As a curator of a museum, for me, I think it's kind of obvious in a funny way, just that the art world has always been operating with a gender bias. It's been towards men. There have been all men shows this entire time. So why not kind of have the opposite or the other? And I find it very fascinating too, because of the media. We're also learning about the people who are behind the scenes, you know, the gender makeup of the people working in the gallery or on the museum exhibition, and not just the artists in the show. So I think there's this sort of gender parity happening all over the place, and we're still not that far away from when we first broke these barriers. So I think it's just kind of different approaches to the pendulum swing and how much impact you want to have and how much of a stink you want to make and say, no, women need to be a part of this.
I think that's a great point on the professional side, the roles in galleries and museums that, you know, in the museum field in particular, it used to be the bigger the museum, it's a given the director's a man, period. And women probably weren't curators in a lot of museums. They were probably the head of education. And that's just how that gender stereotype fit, and in many cases still is. But we're starting to see some major museums in this year having their first director ever, like in my hometown in St. Louis, first female ever since the 1800s to lead St. Louis Art Museum. So it is interesting that it's taken this long, but we're seeing a lot of changes across those positions, which I think is interesting. Yes?
But ironically, Archer Huntington, way back in 1904, when he founded the Hispanic Society of America in New York, his first museum, he hired all women to be curators because he had noted in his career in looking at art that women were far more detail-oriented. They did research much better than men, and generally they wrote better. And so he wanted to hire women to be the curators in his new museum, and he did. I always think of that as just amazing at that time period, and he wasn't afraid to say it out loud. It wasn't like it was hidden. New York City knew it, and that's a big deal.
A huge deal, because you see the opposite in many cases. For instance, Phoebe Apperson-Hearst, who founded the Hearst Museum at UC Berkeley, funded it, paid for it, and it was all men working there. And she sent them around the world doing archaeological digs, but it was her name, her money, all men. You saw both.
And the flip side of Archer's story is that he asked Anna Hyatt to marry him 3 times before she said yes, because she was afraid that her career would be squashed. And he finally convinced her, no, I want to, shout your name to the rooftops. And so even someone like Anna was concerned about what it would mean to be a married woman, and especially a woman married to a prominent philanthropist like Archer Huntington, as well as businessman. So there were lots of things to consider even way back then.
So we've heard about artists or in a curator scenario or marrying into wealth. What about in the other professions we have here? Is it still a topic? If I'm looking at the 2 younger folks newer into their career, is it still a topic? Can I balance those as an artist and or a curator?
Well, it's actually funny because we've had this discussion. already on this trip, and it's been a really interesting thing because it is something that I've considered quite extensively, whether or not that's something that I could balance and actually do well at both. And so it's been really interesting kind of picking the brains of some women who have actually already done it, and just getting some advice and feedback there. And I am grateful that the times have been changing and that there are people that are supportive, and that, you know, the roles are becoming a little bit more equal. And so it's been really enlightening and encouraging to talk with some people.
I like what
But
you
it's
said.
always going to be a loaded topic.
Yes.
Always. Back in the 90s, the early 90s, there was a lot of discussion about whether to start this group or not, simply because what does that say about, what are we trying to say, and how's that going to be perceived? And we were trying to be a supportive of other women, because across the board, none of us had gotten any support really from anyone. It was, you did it yourself. That was the only option, because one, if you asked for advice, they were going to tell you no, basically. So you just don't ask for advice and go do what you're good at. It worked out. But we had
Can
a
we
lot.
quote you on that?
So, yeah, that we've had this discussion and chased this around the bush a million times, but the answer is that we always came to is, yes, it's worth saying. One, I'm a woman artist, when the artist part of me would always rather be a good artist every day. But for some reason, you have to qualify it and say that other stuff so that there are other people there who can say, I can do it too. And we hope that there are people out there who felt that way about seeing us as a group standing up and saying we are proud and honored to be American women artists. We had several people that we invited into the group at the very beginning whose significant others thought it was a really dreadful idea, and were afraid it would damage their career. And we always had those thoughts too. Western art world is a very male-driven still area of the arts. And if you think the statistics are dreadful for women artists, the statistics for women Western artists are worse. That being said, all of us in this group have had wonderful, creative, successful lives inside Western art, or art. And it's I'm sure, put detours in our paths and things that we had to go around instead of over. But there's something about the drive behind that defies gender.
I think you wanted to add something.
I mean, I think I was just, both of you mentioned something which is like doing it well, and I think women are really good at doing it well, whatever that may be, whatever that may be. Yes. So, I mean, and yeah, I think that's also, for me, the struggle of trying to balance, you know, work and life and making those decisions, because I want to do it all well, you know, and I'm not going to do it if I'm not going to do it well. So, and then I wanted to bring up, I had the experience to work with an artist who was married at one point to an artist who's become famous, Robert Rauschenberg, and Susan Whale. Susan Whale was his first and only wife, and actually he went on to have many relationships with men afterwards, and her career was completely sort of occluded by the fact that she was once married to this man. And it's like, oh my God, who wants to be remembered for your ex-boyfriend, you know, your ex-boyfriend or your ex-husband, like, when you're making incredible work. But she's now 89 and working in her studio. You know, that was all that mattered, was she was still making work, and she had her ownership over her life and what she made. I think that's the one thing that I think is helpful with the decision making, of like, if you can still feel proud and ownership over your decisions and what you make, then it's worth it, and you can do whatever you want.
I think if we go from women being artists to the art they do, if you think about this, some great examples of women who were were illustrating what they knew, and in many cases, in those earlier years, it was children or their domestic life. Do we still see that? And I guess my question is the narrative and the storytelling that women put forth in their art, is it different? Is it right to talk about based on gender? I would just love to hear your opinions on that.
Every artist tells their story for a different reason.
Okay.
None of us come from the same place. None of us take the same steps. We can read the same sentence and feel inspired and have 12 different artworks for 12 different people. Mm-hmm. It's not sequential, so I'm not sure that's an answerable.
Right. And do you think gender is a big part of that? This is all opinion. Do you, if you had the same subject, do you think, can we generalize and say a man might approach it differently than a woman, or is that just too broad?
I think you could generalize greatly, because we would approach it differently. But I think that's where you have to stop, because then after that you don't know where it's going for either party.
Right.
Yeah, it's never like mutually exclusive. Like, you know, a lot of women could do the same thing, but not every woman does that same thing, if that makes sense.
I'll throw it to somebody from the media. We saw a couple of instances from Jan's presentation of how AWA was portrayed early in the media, and I have to tell you it happened in 2023, where when the group is talked about, it's not always leading with artists. It's not always even using the word woman. It'll be ladies or the girls, and it has this connotation of not always serious. And I would just love to hear other people's interpretations of either seeing it first in the media. What's your opinion about that, or your experience?
You know, when Donna was talking, I was thinking of all the shows I've juried where in the past, particularly certain shows, did not have names on the works. So I would not know whether it was painted or sculpted by a male or a female. And so I think from my perspective, I've seen still lifes. I could go on with every genre. Animals, et cetera, portraits, you know, that I couldn't tell whether a male or a female painted any of them. I mean, I know marvelous painters of roses who are males and females. So, I have never really thought of it as an issue, and actually it was not until it was brought to our attention because of AWA that we started the women's issue, because I think Peter Trippi, our great editor, and myself never really thought in terms of, is this something we need to do, until it was brought to us. And then it was kind of like, and it was because I spent my life, most of my career in the West, where Cowboy Artists of America and all these other very male-dominated, exclusive entities existed, where it was very male. And it was like, well, if they're going to be that male, and they're riding this week right now as we speak, and Peter Trippi's never been invited on that, but Tim Newton is always invited. Okay, that's a subject I could really get into. But it's really a situation where, yeah, we need to jump on this bandwagon because it's necessary. But then you look at the Bennett Prize and a lot of these entities that are coming up in these last few years that are very much oriented to pushing women artists, and just the curatorial avenue of making sure that women are present in museums. I mean, I can't even tell you the number of museums I've spoken to in the last few years that, I was discussing this with Hannah the other day. You know, it's really bad to be an old white man right now painting. I'm just telling you. Curatorial, it has changed. I'm not talking patrons here, Ned. But I think what's really important is that the steps that have been taken through certainly AWA, but there is a very conscientious, from a curatorial standpoint, museums, I've heard this from the National Gallery, I've heard it from the Smithsonian, and the list is pretty lengthy, that they would much rather right now have women be in that limelight. So it's happening.
And last night we went to Cheryl's, the gallery that Cheryl founded, that has an all-woman show, all AWA women, as a matter of fact. Have you done that previously in your gallery experience? Those of you that are gallerists had all-woman shows, and I'm just curious why you may have chosen to do that if you did.
Yes, I think it was probably about 7 years ago. There was a Women Painting Women was a group of ladies, women. I heard that now, it's in my head. We did, I think, 3 consecutive exhibitions with them, and it was beautiful. It was very well received. The clientele, our clients loved the offerings. They loved the fact that we were actually doing an exhibition for women exclusively. And since then, we have not been approached to do another all-women event. And it's not one of those things that I have the ability to go out and organize myself. So I would welcome another opportunity to be approached to do another all-women show. What's that?
Cheryl, had you experimented with that yourself in the past?
I was just thinking that this might be the first time the gallery, and it's not mine anymore, has had a completely all-women show. Yeah.
Is that something you...
I did a show, which is an ongoing, every 2-year show called 5 Texas Women, and I invite different women to show in the gallery. It's always well received. I always have a big crowd that comes to the gallery. The sales are not brisk.
Interesting. We could have a whole day conversation about that.
Right.
And Brittany, in your museum, I know that's been a focus.
Yes, not fully, maybe consciously, intentionally for
Right.
me. I've worked with a lot of artists who happen to be women, and I think the idea of having an all-women artists exhibition is, it's just this exercise of curating. What is it? It's almost like a science experiment where you're choosing like one control factor to kind of what's the like common factor that all of these things have, and why am I bringing them together? But then often what I find happens is then the differences are just that much brighter, and you kind of, and that's what's exciting, is because even though it's maybe an exhibition of all women, all artists who are women, their work, then you start seeing, oh wow, this person approaches it in this way, or this is how they use this material, so yeah, there's pros and cons, but in a way I think it's a wonderful way to group things together, and then I think it just shows how multifaceted women are.
That's great. That echoes Donna's point, that yes, it's women, but from there, it'll go in a million different directions.
Yeah, the importance is that it's great art.
Great art first,
Yeah.
right. And then finally, Robin, what other exhibitions have you worked with where the focus was women in particular?
Well, since you asked that first question about it, I've been trying to think if there was anything here at Brookgreen. Honestly, I think this is probably the first exhibit of only women.
We're honored.
However, you know, we have had a lot of exhibits that do probably have more work by women than men because of the particular theme. And of course, as I told you this morning, Brookgreen has always looked to women sculptors as an important part of the collection, and they're everywhere here. So I guess the need hasn't been felt to have an all-woman show.
Right. That's a great way to say it.
Just thinking of quality in art as being the major reason for an exhibit.
That's great.
Yeah. Oh, and I just wanted to add, I did curate a show about Elizabeth Catlett, who's an amazing sculptor and printmaker, and we were trying to contextualize her work and bring in other artists. So we did end up having, some men, some women. But I think the important thing too is that, a woman doesn't exist alone in a vacuum with only other women. Like, there are men in her life, most likely, maybe not by choice, but I think so it's important to kind of not silo and just say there's nothing else going on. Yes.
That's great. Well, I am to bet that our audience might have some comments and questions that we would love to again on the things we've talked about thus far. Yes.
I do. I just want to mention, Michele was talking about the women painting women, and I think it was such an important show because it was women who are painting other women. It wasn't glorified as a man might glorify a woman. It was how women see other women. And I think that's so important because I think respect by women towards women has been missing. And it was an amazing show. And there needs to be more like that.
Congratulations. Yes, Sandy.
This is for Amanda. Amanda's doing bronze sculpture, and that seems to me a very man-dominated area, and she's a young woman entering that field. I want you to just talk to us about what you've run into and how you've solved problems that have come up.
Yeah, very, very interesting question. I would say it is very male-dominated, but I'm actually very excited to say that I have been welcomed with open arms. I've had actually more male mentors than female. I can think of 4 off the bat who have kind of taken me under their wing, especially with the business mindset. Some with actual sculpture and pushing me forward there, but also helping me understand the business world since I didn't come from that side of things. And so that's been an extraordinary experience and has definitely elevated my career substantially. So I've been very, very grateful for those people.
That's great to hear.
I'm going to be a Debbie Downer for a moment. I'm going to do a reaching back comment. I'm also part of Washington Society of Landscape Painters, which is the oldest landscape painting organization in the country, over 200 years now. And one of my colleagues that I paint with frequently decided that she wanted to join the painters. And she was a woman, and they said no. So she went to her congresswoman and changed that. And actually, this was probably 15 years ago, maybe 20. Of course, I was 3. Not really. And she got that overturned. Barbara Mikulski was the congresswoman at the time that did this. And 7 of the 40 only members quit because they did not want to see women part of that. And so now we are predominantly women, and there's only about 7 men, and we've had a woman president. Currently, we have a man that's doing it, but prior to that, it had been 3 women in a row. So it's interesting to watch the changes. And they love it that we're on the board because they say we get more work done. So just some perspective on the prejudices and the things that were not that long ago that we did have to fight. As a former gallerist myself, we did our first ad in Fine Art Connoisseur, and my former partner chose 6 pictures, and I said, nope, we're not doing this. 3 of these have got to be women. So it was an issue that we fought to do then. So we have watched a lot of change, and I think forward progress too. So we're pushing forward still too. So.
I was at the National Endowment for the Humanities when Billie Holiday Museum of Women in the Arts, and that was the national profile. And I can remember J. Carter Brown, the director of the National Gallery. He was just horrified that women can hang on our walls, but they were not. Their works were not hanging on the wall. And Billie Holiday had enough of those things about that she didn't listen, and went forward with her own collection that had grown. And I traveled across this country many times, basically around transportation in the early years of the National Women's Museum. People would come up to us and say, "Oh, the National Museum of Women in the Arts," and they were so excited about it because finally there was a platform. But still, this issue, I personally do not think we've come near enough, far enough.
I think we have to have a battery change.
Lisa to the rescue.
Cue the whole music. Here's our go-to.
Did anything about what we just heard from some of these about the museum or bands or anything else strike up any comments or anything while we... Oh. There we go. Any other questions? Oh, I see one in the back. Great.
So I'm wondering if any of you think that the subject matter that we portray as sculptors or painters affects how seriously we're taken as women. I find, because I sculpt very happy, giddy children, that sometimes maybe it's not taken as seriously as something melancholy.
Okay, my work is kind of uniformly about the joy of the cowgirls I draw are always in a joyful, looks like they chose the place themselves kind of a space. And yes, people do take that less seriously. You don't, it's kind of like you don't miss the joy until it's been gone for a while. But to celebrate the joy right up front is seen as more like Walt Disney than it is fine art. So that's something that I know, I've known from the beginning, but it's also something that I feel compelled to say, because I do think that the joy that we experience reflects our character as much as the sorrow. And I would rather live with a smiling person who did it right, at least for that one moment, than a reminder of how sad you can be in this world of ours. So all the stories that I tell are joyous, and I think you're right. Maybe someone else has an opinion, but I do think that joy and expressed in a painting form is slightly more trivialized.
And I'll thank you for that. And I just want to, add, I think historically, it seems to be that the celebration for that concept or that material comes much later, but it seems to be received with some pushback from in the front end, like Norman Rockwell. I mean, he was really scrutinized, and he's marvelously celebrated now. But he was not considered a serious painter, and I think he was absolutely brilliant. But I do find that as a sculptor, I think every now and then, oh gosh, I've really got to do something more museum quality, so it's got to be sad and dreary. I'm sorry, I don't, but I mean, I have children flying with butterflies and swirling with stars, and I can't seem to get away from it. So, thank you.
Well, remember Bessie Potter Vanna's Mothers and Children in Sculpture, Frog Baby by Edith Barreto Parsons, Janet Scudder's Frog Baby, another Frog Baby. I mean, there are so many through the years. Jane Dedecker, she used her own children often as the subjects of her sculpture. And it's a timeless subject. And from the museum perspective, there's nothing wrong with that. And if people are saying that your work isn't serious because it depicts beautiful children, then there's something wrong with that museum, in my opinion.
Bravo.
Or that curator, I should say.
I think that's a great point, Robin, that we keep saying museums with the capital M, but it really is the person in the curatorial decision-making role that can have the power and make those choices. So that's a great point. Any other questions? Then we're going to take a quick break and come back for round two. Yes?
This is very risky.
We have a brave man ready to...
Being the only unpopular white male here.
Oh, I'm not going to live this down ever.
Robin, I want to address this to you because I think of you as neutral, and therefore you'll protect me as I beat a hasty retreat. I see a tremendous significance in the fact that AWA has selected or been selected to have their meeting here. To me, this is an intensely intellectual environment. I see the marriage between Archer Milton Huntington and Anna Hyatt Huntington as two incredibly powerful intellects. I don't think Huntington was as much a philanthropist as he was an enlightened investor in artistic and charitable outcomes. No one, his power to translate ancient Spanish was as exhilarating as her ability to translate her emotions. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is that both used Don Quixote as a symbol. And Quixote represents visionary but impractical. That's the definition of Don Quixote. Mm-hmm. And yet they were terribly visionary and exceedingly practical, because here we are, or here you are. Yeah. And the fact that AWA has evolved, and Jan's history illustrated it, you left adolescence some time ago. You're young adults now in the evolution of an organization. And that's a pretty exciting moment. And the potential that this organization has is incredible, and I don't think you can see it from the inside. It's the forest and the trees bit. But old men, particularly old men who used to have friends named Anne, you're about to burst forth, and the conversation that you're having today, well, you'll look back on and say, we left that behind. you've already succeeded. Pushing forward and reaching back, I thought, was your mission statement. I didn't realize that this was the first time that those four words had been used. And they're exceedingly effective because all of you are pushing forward as a group and individually, but your thought of reaching back and having broken the waves to bring those who are following in your footsteps forward is not only charitable and Christian, it's inspirational in and of itself, and it reminds me of Anna Hyatt and Archer Milton. I think that was their spirit as well. So I think this is a terribly potent place to meet. And I'm going to beat it to the door now. And if you will sing a song, do that little tap dance that you did yesterday.
Well, you don't want me to sing, but I agree what you say about Archer Milton Huntington and Anna Hyatt Huntington. Archer in particular fascinates me. The things that man did, the things he accomplished, the things he learned in his life, the things that he gave to other people, both in the arts and the humanities, I think are unparalleled by any other donor. I could be wrong. I don't know everything about these things, but he was very universal in his interests, not just one narrow thing, even though Hispanic Society of America sounds like a narrow focus. But within that one museum is a treasure trove of all kinds of objects that opens the mind, and how he went about collecting in a very conservative way, actually. He didn't just use his massive fortune to grab things from Spain. He only collected objects that had already left Spain. And also, once the museum was founded and underway, then he would reach out to the Spanish government if something were available in Spain to make sure it was okay. You know, he wasn't out to steal Spain's treasures. And I don't think that's always true of major collectors. Anna, it needs to be said, if you don't already know it, that Anna and Archer came to each other later in life. He was 53 and she was 47 when they married. They had no children. And the things that they did together related to art and the humanities, that was their family. That's what they focused on. And you know, we're still learning Archer Huntington's beneficence today. There are so many things that we don't know about that he gave to, that he founded, that he supported throughout his life quietly. You know, he wasn't a person to have his name out there. And you know, I used to be angry when the show, the Rich and the Famous, Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous, was on, and you saw all the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. Never saw Huntington. You know, he was so quiet. I mean, why come to the back of Beyond here, Murrells Inlet, South Carolina, in 1930 to buy a place? It was to get away from all of that. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I can talk about the Huntingtons forever, but Ned, you can always use me as a neutral person.
We actually have one more question from an online visitor from Santa Ana, and it might be something that you might want to think about during the break. She asks, are there any comments on the Portrait Society of America's Draper Prize and the number of men winners versus women winners? I asked if she knew the ratio, and she dropped offline. So I might take a minute and look that up, but that is, I know a little bit about this award. It was awarded and created after William Draper passed away in the early 2010s, I believe. And this point is, as a former member of the Portrait Society of America, I can't talk today, sorry. The majority of professional portrait artists are women. The board is made up of all men. The award winners are made up of mostly men. So if any of you ladies on the panel are familiar with it, and she wants to know what you feel and think about the lack of women winning these awards when they make up the dominance of the profession.
Okay, we'll look it up a little bit and see what it is. It is. Okay, well, thank you. That's our first half. If you take a 10-minute break, we'll come back and wrap it up. Thank you so much to our speakers, and we'll see you back here in 10.
Guess I better go explain to Ned what I was trying to say.
Oh. A lot of great conversations, but we are ready to, we're a little over, so we'll come together and try to finish as close to on time as possible. Okay, round two. I wanted to kick it off by addressing the question Lisa got from an online, it was actually Mika Denny, who's one of our members, and she's in the show, but she's in California, she couldn't be here. She brought up the Portrait Society, and we looked it up, and 3 out of the 24 awards in 24 years were given to women. 3. And so that was the difference she was pointing out. And Lisa pointed out that she said the majority, I don't actually know if that's true, but majority of portrait artists are women. So just an interesting difference.
Was that an application-based competition, or?
That's a great question. Lisa, it is not.
Or so it's nominated?
So all members are eligible to enter. So what's the percentage of members that are women, I wonder? Because that would feed this whole topic.
I haven't been a member for many years, but when I was a member, an active member, I would say we had close to 1,000 members at the time, and close to 75% to almost 80 were women. And as a former full-time professional portrait artist, my brokers, the majority of the women that they represent are women. So this is a very good and important statistic that I am also aware of. So, but you
Interesting.
also perhaps mentioned that the 3 women winners, their subject matter were women, and then the majority of the male winners, the subject matter were also women.
A lot to take in on that. Thank you, Mika, for asking that. And it would just be interesting. It's one of those things that if you're in it, maybe you're not thinking until somebody goes and looks back and counts and starts saying, is there a pattern? So very interesting. Well, for our remainder of our time, we did talk a lot about the history and reaching back and some things we're seeing now. So if we think about what it takes to continue pushing forward in each of our respective areas of the arts, there's a few questions that I wanted to just hear you talk about a little bit. And the first one in our hashtag world, Women Supporting Women, is one, and this concept of women standing up for women and banding together. And, I would put that generally under the blanket of networking and support. I would just love to hear your experiences about networking with other women, whether, AWA is one, but in other cases, has that been something that has been helpful to you? And let's hear some examples. Did it matter that it was women is the other piece of it, right?
I'm just going to say that I think at this point gender isn't relevant at all. I think it's more important that artists of any gender have a strong business background, because selling art, which ultimately would be why one is creating art to make a living, that it's so critical to have business relationships, business knowledge, that if you're going to be a successful artist, you have to be a business person as much as the passion of creating what you create. And that I have seen over the years as the hugest stumbling block for most women that I have worked with, because they just are so interested, more so than their male counterparts, to the passion of what they do and not giving equal time in their lives to also be business people.
I agree
Go ahead.
100% that I've seen that so many times, and I just feel that artists need to understand why they need galleries, why they need a gallery. They need to understand what a gallery does for them and how they work together and communication between the artist and the gallery. There's nothing more important than that. And then that number one thing, though, is the trust.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be able to trust each other. It works both ways. And it's just very, very important. And it's the business, it's how you build your business, and you've got to understand how it works.
Michele, have you seen the same with your the folks you represent?
Yes, yeah. Usually the relationships that are very open and we communicate really well, we ultimately do a better job for each other. And the more we talk, the smoother things go, and the more we sell, they create things that they want to create that we can sell, that are sellable. And so it's extremely important. So,
And do you think gender is irrelevant? I mean, have you seen through the years differences in how women approach the business side versus men, or is that a moot point?
No, I have not seen
Okay.
that so much
Okay.
in my experience.
And Michele, no?
No, not either.
That's great. And I think it's interesting. I think I shared with you, there was a Harvard study of female MBAs, and this was recent, that they found that, yes, networking mattered, but for that subset, having a female network, and they did the statistics that they ended up in higher, if you will, positions, positions of more responsibility. And I just wonder if that translates to the arts, if it does matter, or, Amanda mentioned earlier some of the best networking she's done is with men who were mentors. Does that matter? Are we at a place where that doesn't matter, that it's women versus men?
I don't think that it's 100% necessary that it is women to women, but I do think that American Women Artists holds a unique position because they are able to speak to other women and understand their specific needs and challenges. And so you start with a common ground, which I think is really valuable. And if you look at men and women in general, so men are typically a lot more assertive in business, in art, in whatever it is that they're doing, and women tend to be a lot higher in agreeableness, which is partly why you get the discrepancies. And so having an organization that is primarily run by women, I think it presents more opportunities for the training of ladies to be in those positions and understand what it takes to be in those roles, which then they can take outside of this organization and be leading in the industry as a whole, which I think is really valuable.
That's a great point. I want to ask once more to the museum folks, and then I want to get back to this the business piece of it. Have you found in the museum profession networking with women to be different or more valuable in any way? It's just interesting because you see some of these studies. I'm just curious.
Robin, do you want to go? Or
Yes, no?
No.
That's great.
Yeah, I was going to say not necessarily. If anything, it's just exciting to see a woman in a higher role at an organization or have a institution that's led or founded by a woman. It's just awesome, and I just think, wow, okay, yes, then I can do this too. Or any friend that's a woman could do it too. And I think having a mentor is the best kind of way to network. And sure, sometimes if it is also a woman, then they can connect with you on, say, like your menstrual cycle impeding your, like your work. But I don't really know. I agree with, I think, everyone here that like professionalism is the most important and like the key thing that comes across as something to help you in your career. And I think for what I've found, like artists who value themselves and their work is also really important, and being able to archive your work and kind of be prepared in the open communication that you have, with the materials ready to go. And that sometimes the professionalism actually is giving you safety. It's helping you protect yourself and your work. And kind of working with the system that's in place can be a really good thing.
I think networking with other women, one of the reasons that I enjoy coming to these when I can, is because it is a room full of women who are engaged in the same craft that you are. So there's a lot of similarity in the questions that we have, and it's different. I go to other shows where it's a mixed bag of male and female artists, and I really enjoy that exchange as well. It's just different. I learn more. I listen more, and people listen more to me in an all-female context, where it seems that there's not as much storytelling and self-aggrandizing in this context. I didn't mean that to be that negative. I really didn't. But
You're just stating your observations.
I just enjoy this because it's a chance for all of us to be equal part of a conversation. Mm-hmm. And in the other context, which I also enjoy, there's always going to be somebody who's got a great story to tell.
Right.
So.
Right.
And just going back to what Amanda was saying about this sort of the difference that studies have found between men and women, of women being more agreeable and men being more assertive. Just in thinking about applying for jobs or applying for competitions or submitting your work, there are probably subconscious things happening when women are reading sort of the criteria that's required for something. Or I think women, since we're more agreeable, we're like, oh, that's all right, we don't need to do that. But that's where I think we can make a change and say, okay, maybe I'm not identifying 100% with what is being asked here or what is wanted, but I still value myself, and I still am going to go for this opportunity because I want it. So
I think that's a great point, and I think there are actually studies that back that up. If you look at Harvard Business Review, that's what my reference right now, because it's about women in business a lot. They talk about that women in these studies were less likely to apply for a position unless they hit every single requirement on the resume, whereas they found men would apply anyway. And that was a statistically different behavior in those studies. So it's really interesting. And I think you're hitting on that point, that maybe there's some more trepidation in jumping forward or pushing forward in that scenario. And if we go back to your point about business training and being prepared, I mean, I think that's in art in general. I don't think that's necessarily a gender difference, at least in my own experience. But Amanda, I'm going to put you on the spot. I think you had a great experience with a more business, it was quote unquote business oriented, and you may have been the only artist as part of that group. Could you talk a little about that?
Yeah, so it's one of the only artists. There's one or two others, but in Bozeman, Montana, there's a business group called the Bozeman Mastermind. And so it's just a bunch of business owners that are in the area. And we come together and we help each other problem solve the things that we're coming up against and facing. And so that's been an extraordinary place for me to learn and glean from people who have been professionally in business for many, many years. And so I've really enjoyed that, and it's been interesting because there's whole mindset shifts and there's ways of approaching art as a business that I think a lot of people don't even know about. And so I've seen some incredible shift in sales and honestly in my own confidence. And we talked earlier a little bit about feeling like people don't necessarily take us particularly seriously as artists. And I definitely went into that group with that mindset because I was very intimidated by a room full of primarily men and business owners that have real businesses. And so it was interesting because I felt like I came in as this underlying bottom, you know, and it was amazing because I've learned a lot from them, but they've also bolstered my confidence and helped me to realize that art is a legitimate trade and it is a legitimate business and we are entrepreneurs and we need to take ourselves seriously. And so as my mindset has shifted, I feel like even if there are people who don't take me seriously, it's changed my narrative inside, and so I can cast them aside and just say, you know what, like I believe in what I'm doing and I'm confident in it, and so what other people believe is kind of irrelevant, honestly, because I'm staying true to who I am and what I am passionate about, and I believe that art makes a difference in the world. You know, like we change how people experience the world, whether they believe it or not. So the fact that, you know, Angela, that you're doing things that you believe in and that you feel like bring you joy, and that's authentic and that will connect with somebody. And you may never talk to them, and maybe you only hear from the people that are critical of your work, but it makes a difference. And so that is one of the most important things, I think, is to just stay true to who you are.
Bravo. And I think what you said there about gaining the business experience, and we've seen that in museums, and you know, at least when I started in the museum profession, there wasn't a lot of folks that had an MBA on the staff. It was, most of the directors were PhDs, subject matter experts, and you've seen a shift in that profession towards a lot more business training, and galleries have had to be businesses from the start. But do you think that the world that we live in now, where anybody can sell something in 5 minutes online, and call themselves a business person or an entrepreneur, how has that affected? I'd love to hear from the gallerists in particular, because Cheryl, you said that artists need to understand why they need a gallery. Do you think the fact that somebody can just jump online and consider themselves in business has affected that? I'm just curious. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it can be an effective partnership. I mean, the artists who do have the ability to market themselves and work with the gallery at the same time, there's no reason those things, you know, you can't do both of those things. And it's extremely effective for the partnership as a whole. So I think it's a good thing. I always encourage that, and like you say, if you have that confidence mindset and you're willing to go out there and actually, you know, speak about yourself and put yourself out there and work with the gallery, you're even going to be more successful. So,
that's great. Cheryl, did you want to expand on that?
I haven't encouraged that that much, but I do caveat that it has to be done right. If the artist can do it, fine, but I have seen it not done so well, and that really is not good. So generally, I haven't encouraged that, and there are a number of artists who can do it quite well, but there are more that cannot, and don't really want to take the time to figure it out and to make the presentation and to deal with it online. Most, in my experience,
that's the time that it takes.
They'd rather the gallery sell their work than they try to sell it.
That's interesting. We are moving along in time, and at the last, I'm getting the almost a hook. The last thing that I wanted to ask before, and then we'll open it up for questions, is the question we love to throw out, and we've touched on it in a few ways, is how relevant is a group like AWA, right? And you know, Donna, you were there at the beginning when it felt like it was this point counterpoint, particularly in Western art, to come together as a group. And then we have Anne saying gender's not relevant necessarily. And what is gender? We could have a symposium on that. What does it mean to be a woman? All of those things. But what is the relevance of a group? Because to Donna's point earlier, we have artists that will not join because they don't want to be labeled a woman artist. Artist first, my art first, and they see it as a potential detriment. So I would just like to close us out with how we feel now about the relevance of a group like this.
I think
You know,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I really feel strongly that the group is relevant, but I think this is not going to sound really good, but I think that one of the necessary components of pre-exhibition time is to be educational in nature, having workshops or symposiums or whatever about what is going to affect the artist personally going forward, be it marketing workshops, social media workshops, and really boring subjects like insurance and shipping and you know, I could go on and on. But I think that is more relevant today for a membership like this, so that everyone can garner information they can use in their day-to-day art business life.
That's a great point, and it's something we have talked about, that we've seen a real need for that and haven't found another organization that's doing it the way that we're envisioning it. So that's great advice.
And you do know AWA has done symposiums on exactly those things.
That's right.
Just checking.
Yes, and we are bringing that subject back. Next year's symposium is going to focus on business, so we're going to have a revisit. But I don't think there's ever enough. and I think I'm hearing more and more and more of that. So it's a great point. Other areas beyond the business training, we've talked a little about mentoring. Anything else about AWA and its relevance?
Can I bring up another situation? Sure. I'm sorry to be so pushy. Hey, that's what happens when you hit your mid-70s. You just talk when it seems appropriate. But the National Sculpture Society has an ambassador program that is very successful, and it's a very young life. It's only a few years old, but it's regional, and it's a mentorship program for sculptors in the very changing world of sculpture, you know, foundries closing, costs of everything. Anyway, and I would love to see that be another step in AWA's future, because it being regional, it's something where people can get together in a much easier capacity than just the national.
We've heard that before too. That's great advice. Yeah. Robin?
Yeah, I'm going to build on what Anne said with the ambassador program in the NSS. Another reason for that is because the National Sculpture Society is headquartered in New York City, a lot of the members from across the country couldn't always go to New York to see the exhibits there or to come to South Carolina when we have the annual awards exhibition here. And so the ambassador programs came about to address the need of mentoring, but also to give these regional groups the opportunity to exhibit under the banner of the NSS. And they've had some fabulous exhibitions. You know, these are large regional groups, not just, you know, a small 2 or 3 counties, so to speak, but in 2 or 3 states being represented in some of them. And the third reason is that a lot of these artists felt alone. I mean, they, especially with the pandemic, having isolated so many people, that they missed the opportunity to get together and network, to talk about what they're doing, have critiques, whatever. And so these ambassador groups have served that need, even if it's just to chat over a glass of wine.
Sure.
But it's they've had workshops and these exhibitions, and the fact that they can interact with one another. So that's been so important.
That's great.
I know art history talks about the lone artist all the time, and these fabulous people who worked by themselves. They might have, but I rather doubt it. I think they all had a network of some sort supporting them.
Thank you. I'm guessing we have some wrap-up questions right here in the front.
Not a question, but a statement. As the president and an artist, you were both right. It's a very solitary profession. And I not necessarily a gender of women needing to feel like they're equal, but women make art differently than men do. And that's a fact. We think differently, we see differently, and we're underrepresented in that. And because we're so solitary, what I think AWA has brought to my studio is the very mission statement: encourage, celebrate, inspire. That's what women do for each other better than anybody on the planet can do. So there has been a tremendous relevance, I think, in this organization for me as an artist, to be able to find like-minded people that I can sit down and talk shop with. If you could hear the buzzing going on in our house at the beach, it's a lot of it's about our art and the excitement about how we make it and what do you do, and the solitary component of that. So whether we can expand that to mentorship or whether we can expand that to ambassadorship and be more inclusive with some of the plans that I've spoken with Sandra about that we want to do going forward, I think there's a tremendous role still for women supporting women.
Any other questions? Yes? Getting my steps in.
So I'm wondering, of those of you who sell other people's art, so how often do you find that it's an emotional buy versus they come in informed about the credentials and so forth? Or I'm just curious about maybe what the percentage, what the ratio is.
Very high. It's, yes. So
For emotion?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia. There's emotion, connection. It kind of all has to be there. At the level of art that I sell. I know there's investment art that's an entirely different subject. But yeah, it's very, very emotional. Mm-hmm. And you can usually see it. When somebody connects with a painting or a sculpture, you can really see it, and you kind of, as a salesperson, you learn to recognize that. And yeah, it's a very high percentage. Yeah, sometimes it's just purely decorative, but most of the time there's a connection.
And do you tend to find women being drawn to the art of women, or is there anything that you've noticed along the way?
It's funny. That does happen occasionally, but it's not something that I notice on a regular basis. We have a male artist named Lynn, and I had some woman really connect with his work thinking it was a woman. So it does happen every now and again, but it's not something that I notice on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. No.
And Cheryl, for you, emotion?
I would agree, very high, very high. And sometimes some of the reasons they give you are bizarre.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I won't go there. I mean, I've heard everything, but very high, emotional.
Do we have any more questions? I'm going to ask one related to the museum folks. When we were, it just came to my mind when we were talking about business training and understanding gallery relationships. Part of obviously our 25 and 25 is to help women have shows in museums. Can you lift the veil slightly about the mysterious role of museum curators? And because people are always asking, how do I get into a museum? How do I get a museum show? And it feels so different depending on the museum, but if you could say, what are some of the criteria you think about for artists that you may not already know, or how do you make those kind of choices?
Well, in my job, what I try to do is find out who's out there, who's doing what, where they're doing it, and to keep track, to keep up with their careers. I mean, luckily I've been doing this for a long time, so I've gotten to know a lot of artists and a lot of collectors, and I'm finding now that many of my museum contacts have either retired or died, so I have to make some new ones there. But it's really all, I'm simplifying this tremendously,
Sure.
but the main thing is to reach out to that curator. If you want a show, ask. And all they can do is say no. They might say yes, but they might then have an idea of what they can do in the future. You know, there's no bad question or bad idea. And honestly, it makes it easier for me when you tell me what you want to do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Brittany, how about where you are? Is that similar?
Well, every museum is different, and
Sure.
there's so many different kinds of museums too. I mean, encyclopedic, or I work at a contemporary art museum. Gosh, I would say my approach has been really, as you said, Robin, just it's a constant search and a constant kind of wanting to meet new people, see new things. So I think the best thing as an artist that you can do is be open to different contexts and showing your work, and then getting on people's radars. I don't know if I think for me the best way I like to engage with an artist is setting up like a studio visit. Even nowadays we're so lucky we can do like a virtual one. Or you can sort of send like a professional kind of presentation of your work, because that already gives us curators like a really good sense of how you are to work with, but also what you want, how you want to present your work, even if that's just like a little PDF, or it's your Instagram, or it's your website or something. And then just keeping curators up to date on what's going on with you. If you're starting a new body of work, or you've won an award or something, I think that's such a great way to sort of like keep in touch and just make sure that somebody's aware of what you're doing. It's really, for me, all about visibility, and that's part of the work's on me to kind of find you and just keep looking. So. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I can't tell you how many times we get asked that, so I appreciate it. And I think our time is winding down. I want to, do you have another question? Oh, I have one more question.
I don't have a question. I just would like to take a moment. I would like to ask my board of directors to stand, and any of the artists that are present to stand. There's somebody that we would like to honor. This is the first opportunity that we have had to have in-person presentation. And we would not be doing this without Sandra. We are so filled with respect. We honor you under your
your tutelage, your leadership, your kindness, patience, expertise, experience. We all just and respect you so much, and we would not be doing this without your leadership. And we wanted to publicly as we could, without embarrassing you. We know we are because you're so humble, but thank you. We love you, honey.
Jeez. Thank you, but this is not about me, but thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you. The other thank yous. I wanted to recognize our board, of course, and of course Ned Twining, who made today possible. And I wanted to recognize all the artists that are in the show. And I hope everybody, please stand if you're in the show. Yay! And we're so excited for the preview tomorrow night and then the public opening Saturday. So we are so excited to be here through July 23rd. So hopefully everybody will see it. We'll know the awards tomorrow night. So that's exciting. Of course, I want to thank Brookgreen, and I need to thank the Men in Blacks, Spark Street Digital in the back. They've made this happen online. And thank you to the folks that are online that have been listening to us. And I would encourage you, if you're new to AWA, go to the website, read Jan's blog, find out. You can see that if you're online, you can see all the images in the show, even if you can't come. And if you're so inclined, if you're an artist that isn't a member, please join. And you can support us in many ways. So last but not least, yes?
I want to add one thing. On Saturday, when the exhibit opens to the public, at 11 o'clock, we have a gallery talk. Usually I do this, but you all are here. Please come at 11, and we'll have you talk about your artwork.
Perfect.
Informal, nothing lengthy. You're just standing in the gallery. Thanks.
That's exciting. Thank you. And thank you to each and every one of our speakers. A nice round of applause for our participants. And of course for Jan, who kicked us off this morning. And with that, thank you, and we'll see you next time.